Hey there and welcome to MurderTube, where for the third time in a row we have another requested case. A case that involves comic books, rock music, serial killers, and of course murder. This is the case of Todd Loren. Todd was actually born Stuart Loren Shapiro on January 14th, 1960 in Detroit, Michigan. From a very young age, Todd had two passions in life: rock music and comic books. When he was just a teenager, he began to promote comic conventions and record collector sales, and he was very good at this. So good, in fact, that when he was just 19, he was able to buy his own home in San Diego, California. So of course he moved there. Around the same time, he decided to change his name to Todd Loren. In the late 1980s, he decided to take his love of rock music and start up his own company called Musicade. Musicade sold rock memorabilia via mail order. Now this memorabilia was quite often bootleg and unauthorized. He didn't have a permit to sell this type of stuff. This of course annoyed some of the publishers, merchandising company, record labels, but Todd didn't care. He was going to do what he wanted to do, and he didn't care if it annoyed someone else, if they didn't like him, they didn't like his company. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. Musicade ran for a few years, but in 1989, he decided to start up a different company. Selling just the rock music memorabilia wasn't enough. He wanted to combine his two passions, so he started Revolutionary Comics. The main idea behind Revolutionary Comics was to create comic books based on rock bands and rock stars. They would kind of be biography stories, sometimes parody type stories, with each issue being a different band or rock star. These were of course unauthorized as well, but despite being unauthorized, these comics sold very well. The very first issue was based on Guns N' Roses, and in the first few weeks already sold around 10,000 copies. As the weeks went on and more issues were released, these sales continued. It didn't take long though for these comic books to annoy the publishers, record companies, agents, merchandisers, and some of the musicians themselves. Some musicians actually did like the comics, they liked the publicity they got from it, or liked being the comic book hero. But then the lawsuits started, and there were a lot of lawsuits. These companies did not like that he was selling these stories and using the band's names and logos and stories without having a permit to sell this memorabilia. They also didn't really like that they had no control over what Todd was saying in these comics. But Todd didn't care. Todd believed in freedom of speech, and he believed that comic books were no different than a newspaper or a magazine doing an article on a band. However, even though the comics made a lot of money, Todd was spending a lot of money on legal defenses, and most of the time he would actually settle out of court. Once he settled with one lawsuit, another one was coming in, and he would settle on that one, and then another one. Until he got fed up with that, and he decided not to settle on a lawsuit, but actually take it to court. And this one was over a comic that he did on New Kids on the Block. So Todd took the New Kids on the Block lawsuit to trial, and he won. He won under the Fifth Amendment freedom of speech. Despite winning, the lawsuits didn't stop. The lawsuits continued and continued and continued. This time they were more so going after him whenever he used a band's name or a band's logo that he didn't really have the right to use, their trademarked type logos and stuff like that. But Todd loved and thrived off of the attention and publicity that he got. His unauthorized comics would most often outsell the authorized comics and stories and media. He even started to put on the front cover of his comics, unauthorized and proud of it. He didn't care if he annoyed people. He was going to do what he wanted to do. He was stuck with his opinion, and he was going to fight anyone that challenged him. Not only did he have a lot of enemies in the rock music industry, but he was also largely despised in the comic book industry also. Unfortunately, he was well known for his lowball payments to his artists and writers, and a lot of people in the industry saw his artistic standards as shoddy. However, he actually helped the comic book industry in a large way in a fight against censorship in comics. A close friend and co-worker said, Todd was a visionary with a solid belief and a stubborn willingness to stick to that belief, when changing it would have been more convenient. He took a lot of shit and he dished a lot out as well. They say that having a common enemy makes people closer. At Revolutionary, we had a lot of enemies. It was very much an us against the world attitude. We were almost a family. A dysfunctional family, but family all the same. On the 18th of June 1992, Todd did not show up to work. This was unusual for him, so his dad that actually worked with him at Revolutionary Comics went to his condo. The door was locked, so he called a locksmith, and inside the condo in the bedroom, he found his son's body, bludgeoned and stabbed to death. Nothing in the apartment was stolen. The only thing that was missing was Todd's car. The police believe that whoever killed Todd used his keys to lock up the apartment and then get his car and drive away. They believe that whoever was in possession of his car would be the murderer. However, after the murder, it came out as quite a surprise to a lot of people that Todd was gay. This was something that very few people knew about him. And unfortunately, a lot of people believe that the San Diego Police Department did not investigate Todd's murder well enough, and they just considered it another homosexual murder that wasn't really worth their time. But 2 days after he was found dead, his car was found abandoned in Hayward, California, and there were fingerprints inside the car. The fingerprints led to the arrest of Gary Lee Stewart. Gary confessed to driving the stolen vehicle. However, he denied any involvement or knowledge of the murder. He was arrested for being in possession of stolen property. Now, I don't like to provide any misinformation if I'm not sure on something, so all I can tell you on this one is I can find no further information on Gary Lee Stewart. Whether he was believed to be a suspect, or whether the police believe that he wasn't in the house at all and he just became in possession of the car somehow, I really can't tell either way. All I can tell you is he wasn't arrested for the murder of Todd. Now, Todd had a lot of enemies in the rock music industry as well as the comic book industry, so it may not be surprising that someone that spent their entire adult life making enemies would end up murdered. But what might be surprising is that maybe had nothing to do with his murder. It's very possible that no one in either of those industries had anything to do with Todd's death. And the main reason for that is due to Todd's privacy. Ironically, for someone that spent most of their adult life and earning most of their money from telling the stories of other people, Todd was very private about his own life. People knew him for his comics and his businesses, but most people didn't even know that he was gay. And likewise, most people didn't know where Todd lived. Todd was murdered not just at his home, but in his bedroom. Now, while it may be relatively easy to have found out where he lived, it's highly unlikely that Todd would have let some random person into his house and into his bedroom. There's no information to suggest that Todd was killed in a different location and his body was moved. It's believed he was killed in his bedroom. So most likely the murderer is someone that Todd knows very well. Someone that is close to him, that knows where he lives and spends time in his house with him. The problem with this, though, is there was really no reason or evidence to believe that his family or close friends would have murdered him. So his case remained unsolved for a number of years, and then 5 years later, a new suspect appeared. Now this is where serial killer Andrew Cunanan comes into the Todd Loren story. Andrew was a prolific liar and drug dealer, and he was known to be at times hard into meth and alcohol. He had come out as gay in high school, and he had quite a few relationships with wealthy older men. These men would quite often fund his lifestyle. But then on April 27th, 1997, Andrew used a hammer to beat his friend Jeffrey Trail to death. A few days later, on May 2nd, he shot and killed his other friend, David Madsen. The next day, May 3rd, the prominent gay real estate developer Lee Miglin was bound, stabbed 20 times with a screwdriver, and his throat was slit. His car was then stolen. On May 9th, cemetery caretaker William Reese was shot and killed. It's believed Andrew murdered this man purely so he could steal his truck. Due to these string of murders, Andrew was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. On July 19th, the wealthy gay fashion designer Gianni Versace was shot twice in the head by Andrew on the front step of his mansion. And finally, on July 23rd, 1997, Andrew shot himself in the head and committed suicide. His motives for these string of murders are mostly unknown. Throughout the video, I specifically mentioned certain people that were gay, and the reason for that is that it's potentially relevant to Todd's murder. See, Andrew had killed his friends and killed the caretaker for his vehicle, but the other people he killed seemed to be more random, and these people just so happened to be prominent gay figures in the local community. Andrew had bludgeoned and stabbed some of his victims, and he stole some of his victims' vehicles. Todd was a prominent gay figure in the community. He was bludgeoned and stabbed to death, and his vehicle was stolen. Todd was murdered 5 years before the string of murders that Andrew is mostly known for, so it may be a little bit of a stretch to link the two. However, it is believed that Andrew and Todd would have been hanging out at the same gay clubs and gay social circles in the Hillcrest area around the same time. On top of that, Todd actually dated someone that he met at a gay club briefly. The description of this person that he gave to his parents matched the description of Andrew. The police and the FBI saw these links as well, so they investigated Andrew as the potential murderer of Todd Loren. Todd's murderer was never found. There was not enough evidence linking Andrew, or even to say that they definitely did date or definitely met each other in any way at the gay club. Because Andrew committed suicide, he obviously can't be interrogated or won't confess to it. And Todd was so private that we really don't know if the two of them were ever actually linked in any way. Maybe he was the first victim of Andrew. Maybe Gary had killed him. Maybe it was someone else. Because Todd is so private, there's really little information to go on, and to this day, Todd's murder remains unsolved, and the San Diego Police Department have a cold case on it. Unfortunately, Todd was just 32 years old when he was brutally murdered. Not only did he not deserve to be murdered in that way, he really didn't deserve to be murdered at all, and I think if he had continued to live, he would have continued to push the boundaries in the rock music industry and the comic book industry, and what we've got today could be different if Todd was still alive. Maybe he was the first victim of Andrew, maybe Gary was more involved than just being in possession of the vehicle, or maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was someone in the rock music industry or the comic book industry. Let me know in the comments below who you think it was. And as always, like the video if you liked it, dislike if you don't, let me know why. And be sure to subscribe, as we'll have 2 videos per week. And stay safe out there, guys. It is a very crazy world.